What is up, everyone? My name is Carla and welcome back to Crumb. In this week's tutorial we are going to be making sugar roses with a special little trick, which is an outer layer of wired petals that will give you some flexibility when it comes to arranging your sugar roses onto a cake. It will also hopefully help eliminate breakage that can sometimes happen when you're doing the arranging. I will be linking all of the tools and materials used in this tutorial in the description box below. We are going to get started right now. We are starting with a 1-inch styrofoam rose cone and 18 gauge floral wire with a hook bent into the end. I'm using a cell stick to bore a shallow hole at the base of the styrofoam rose cone. I'm using a little ball of gum paste here and just some water inside of the hole as glue to secure my wire to the styrofoam cone. This is an alternative to using hot glue if you don't want to use a hot glue gun or don't have one. Just use your cell stick to make sure that the paste is well secured around the wire, and then let the whole thing dry for an hour or two before proceeding. I'm using a peach color of gum paste here, rolling it out relatively thinly and cutting out a 5-petal set, and then dividing up each of those 5 petals with a pair of scissors. You can use an individual rose petal cutter for this. I'm just doing this for speed. And I'm working on all 5 of my petals at once. If you work more slowly, you can cover some of your petals in a sheet of plastic wrap or put them inside of a Ziploc bag to stop them from drying out. Add water or edible glue generously to the first petal, and then the subsequent petals just get a little bit of edible glue or water around the sides and a little at the base. I am using water, but you could use egg whites or Tylose glue. Pick up your first petal and you're just going to use it to cover the top of the rose cone and just overlap it at the top, and then get rid of the excess paste at the base. This will all be covered later with more petals. Your second petal will just cover the seam of the first petal, make sure it's well attached. The third petal will now go directly opposite the second petal. You can flare open the top a little bit, pick up your fourth petal and cover the seam of the third petal, and then open up the edge of the third petal and just tuck that fourth petal inside. Then open up a little door and stick in your fifth petal. You'll see I'm using my cell stick here just to smooth down the base of all those petals and make sure they're well secured. I'm opening up a little door there just in preparation for the last petal. You need one more petal, so I'm just using the side of my 5-petal cutter and my scissors again. And as before, smooth that out and thin it out with your ball tool. Add a little bit of edible glue or water to the sides and a little at the base. And that little open door that you left behind from petal number 5 is now where petal number 6 will go. And then wrap it around and attach it, and make sure it's well attached at the base. We are going to move on and make another layer of petals. I'm adding some white gum paste in equal parts. So 1 part peach gum paste, 1 part white gum paste to lighten the paste. That will create a natural ombre effect for our finished flower. I am using an individual rose petal cutter here, and I'm cutting out 6 petals. I'm going to work on these and vein them, so I'm going to put them away in a Ziploc bag and just work on them individually. Again, use your ball tool and your foam pad to smooth and thin out the petal I'm using a lovely rose petal veiner here, which has really good texture, giving the petal a really good press, and then placing it back onto the foam pad. You can use a Dresden tool for this part, just to curl back the edges of the rose petal just a little bit. And as I go, I'm placing each petal onto my workstation just to firm up a little bit as I work on the subsequent petals. So repeat the process, and instead of using a Dresden tool, you can use a cell stick to curl back the edges of the petal if that's easier for you, or a toothpick, whatever you have at hand. And again, water or edible glue goes at the sides of each petal and also at the base. And I'm just identifying a seam between two previous petals and just covering them and making sure that all the petals are at the same height at this stage. And again, covering the previous petal 50-50 with the next petal and continuing to add petals in the same way, covering each previous one by 50% until you've made it all the way around. For the last petal, you'll want to open up the first petal that you placed for that row and just tuck the last petal inside. I am using my Dresden tool just to make sure that's well attached inside, and then I'm closing the door back on that last petal. And I'm now gonna pinch the edges of the petals just a little and curl them back. Make sure that everything I just added is well attached at the base. And you could go back in and use your fingers or use your Dresden tool or your cell stick just to give the petals a little bit more movement. Open them up a bit so that the flower looks like it's blooming and it's not too cramped. And then you can just stick that into styrofoam while we go on with the next row. So I'm adding another ball of white gum paste to this to lighten the peach color even more. Again, that's to create a nice gradient. As the rose opens up, the petals get paler in color. I'm using my rose petal cutter here again and cutting out 6 shapes. You are going to want to smooth these out and enlarge them just a little bit with your ball tool and then vein them as before. Again, you can curl back the edges of each petal with your cell stick or your Dresden tool. And with this particular row, we are going to use a ball tool just to cup the petal a bit more at the base. And again, as you work on each petal, let it rest on your workstation just to firm up a little bit before we add it to the flower. Water or edible glue, again, goes at the base of each petal and then up the sides in a V. And with this particular row of petals, we are going to be identifying a little opening, a little open door from the previous row and sticking the first petal of this row in there. And then just continue adding petals as you did before for the previous row until you've made it all the way around. And just make sure that this row of petals is sitting slightly lower than the row before to make the rose look as though it is in bloom. Now we're going to move on to the final row of petals. These ones have a wire in them, so I'm using my cell board here to create a handy groove in each petal where I can easily add the wire. But I will show you an alternative method in a little bit if you don't have a cell board to get the same effect. So roll your paste onto your cell board until you can see the grooves showing through the paste. Remove your paste and use the larger size rose petal cutter to cut out 5 petals. Again, use a ball tool to smooth out the raw cut edge of each petal and just thin out the paste a bit at the edges. And use 24 gauge white floral wire dipped in water or edible glue. I usually wipe the excess glue or water off on the back of my hand before threading the wire into the groove created by the cell board. Make sure the paste is well attached at the base of the wire. And these petals also get veined in the veiner. Don't be shy, give them a good press. And to create an extra bit of realism, I'm going to use the rose petal cutter, specifically the base of the cutter, to cut a notch out of the tip of each petal. And then I'm using my Dresden tool just to thin out and shred that notched area. And what this does is create the look of a guard petal, which is the outer row of petals on a real rose, which usually have this shredded, notched section at the center and are also curled a bit backward like our other petals. So again, use your Dresden tool or your cell stick for that. I give the petals a little pinch at the base and I slightly bend the wire and then cup them in my fingers to make sure that they have a nice curve. And to keep them in that position, I typically use acoustic foam or bumpy foam as a cradle while those petals dry. You can use a ball tool for this part to get your petals to curl backward. It can create a slightly different look and give your petals a bit of visual interest. And again, pinch the petal at the base and gently cup it and stretch it between your fingers and then lay it in the bumpy foam to dry. As promised, here's the alternative method if you don't have a cell board. You can roll a sausage of paste and then use a cell stick or a small rolling pin just to create a ramp of paste in the center and then cut out your petal in the same way and thread the wire through that thicker ramp area that you created with your little rolling pin. You will want to cut out 2 extra petals in addition to the 5 that you cut out so that you have a total of 7. We're now going to add some color to our petals and the rose center that we already made. I'm using a chestnut brown, an apple green, a color called fuchsia, which is more of a dusty pink, and then this lovely peach color called pumpkin from Crystal Colors. You'll want some edging brushes and one soft, fluffy eyeshadow brush for this particular job. And I'm starting with the edging brushes, mixing together the dusty pink, aka fuchsia petal dust with the peachy pumpkin color. And I am aiming the color just inside of all of the crevices. The point here is to darken all of the shadows so that the flower has more dimension. You can turn it upside down to knock any excess petal dust off of the petals. And then you'll want to do the same thing to each of your wired petals. So I will be switching here to the softer eyeshadow brush for this job. And you're aiming for a gentle fade of color from the base of the petal, just fading outwards toward the tips. Now you can use your edging brush again and mix the apple green and the chestnut brown color together and go in and add some green edging and some accents to the tips of some of the petals. Most roses, particularly of this peach blush color variation, have quite a lot of green on them if you see them in real life and really study them. They also have brown in various places, particularly in the middle. And once you're done adding all of those lovely details with your petal dust, we can move on to assembling our flower. I usually bend back the wires on my petals before I start, just so that everything's ready to go. Start with your first petal and tape it on. And now you're going to be bringing in subsequent petals and just overlapping them slightly. This is typically a game of Tetris. You're trying to pick petals that will just fit exactly into place. Sometimes you have to choose a different petal than the one you started with to see where it will go naturally. And once you've added all of your petals, or as many as you think will fit in that outer row while overlapping slightly, then you can tape down the rest of the wire with your floral tape just to finish off the stem. And as a final touch, I'm adding some extra green mixed in with just a little bit of that chestnut brown to all of the shredded areas of my outer row or my guard petals. The beauty of the wired outer row of petals is that they can move around a bit when you arrange this flower on a cake. You can, of course, add a calyx if you know that the rose is being placed on the cake in such a way that it will be seen from the back. However, a calyx will, of course, lock that outer row of petals into position. And there you have it. If you stay tuned to our channel, we will be posting a subsequent video on how to make rose leaves and also how to make the rosebud with a calyx. So hopefully we will catch you for those upcoming tutorials. Thank you so much for watching. And if you liked the video, please consider giving us a like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel so that we can keep making sugar flower tutorials as well as sharing cake baking and decorating tips with you.